Have you ever used one of those apps on your phone to count your steps? I haven't, but this morning I set a goal to count my steps during my walk. And I left my building and it was a really warm, very warm day. And there is a fuzzy caterpillar crawling on the wall outside of my door. And I stopped and I looked at it for a minute and I watched it crawl up the wall, and there was no destination for it to go to, but I left it there and it kept crawling along the wall, and I imagined where it was planning on going. And then I began my walk and I decided that my goal would be 2,000 steps that I would count. And I actually counted about 2,500 steps before turning around and coming home. And as I counted my steps, I lost count on occasion. But I didn't let it stress me out. I didn't let it make me feel like I hadn't achieved my objective. I just resumed counting as best as I could from wherever I left off. And I kept count by maintaining two pieces of data in my mind. One was the total number of steps in 10-step units, and the other was my ongoing walking, where I counted every step in multiples of 10. So I would count 10 steps and then update the piece of information in my mind, whether that was 10, 20, 30, 50, 100, 500, 1,000, all the way up to 2,500 steps before turning around and coming home. And as I kept count in my mind, it pushed out all of these other thoughts that I might have had, and I really felt like I was much closer to just being. But of course, my subconscious kept me safe, and I was able to maintain a sense of the direction in which I was traveling. And I was able to sense all of the danger around me. I stopped at street corners, I let cars pass, but I chose a really quiet neighborhood, and I meandered back and forth down these roads, and they were very quiet, and that was by design because I didn't want to have any conversations this morning. And usually when I walk, somebody will say something to me, even if it's hi. But I didn't have that this morning while I did my count. I didn't say hello to anyone. I was just counting. And as I kept going, I walked past different signs, real estate signs in people's yards, street signs, all kinds of signs. And some of them I was able to read, but then I pushed those thoughts out. I didn't intend to read them. But there were a few where I could look at them and not actually process the information that was portrayed. I was able to actually look at some of these signs as if they were just images without letters that had meaning. And I'm sure I will spend some time contemplating how animals think without words later today. But that was a good feeling, this sense of just being while I walked and continued my count. And as I continued to walk, there was a swarm of bees. Now, I'm not saying it was 100 or 1,000 bees. It was more like 20 or 30. Could have been 10. I didn't count every individual one. I didn't count any of them, but it was certainly no less than 10. But it felt like about 20 or 30. And as I approached this swarm of bees, they were all flying over the sidewalk. I didn't go around them. I went through them, and I had no fear, but I had caution. My subconscious helped me traverse through these bees in such a way that I didn't disturb what they were doing, and they left me alone. And I looked at them, and they didn't seem hostile, and I didn't see a hive anywhere. They were just flying around, and some of them were chasing each other. It was almost like they were playing, these bees chasing each other back and forth in front of me. And so I got through this swarm of bees this morning, and there was a structure ahead of me, a little bit further along. And it was a stone structure, and stone structures are not very common around here. You see brick, you see siding, you see wood, but stone is very uncommon. And there was this stone structure, and it had these curved walls, and these curved walls connected, and at the base, where these curved walls connected, was a plant between each connection. And it really looked like a castle. It was designed as if it was a castle, and it was an interesting destination after passing through this swarm of bees to arrive at this castle. And I thought to myself that this was something that I don't usually notice. I might have passed it a dozen times and I've never noticed it. But clearing my head and filling my thoughts with just a count while I walked by actually made me more aware of my environment, not less aware. It made me feel like I saw more things, not fewer things. And there were even some birds on a fence near this castle, and there were probably about 4 of these birds, and they were a little bit bigger than a finch, smaller than a pigeon. That's what we mostly have around here. And they were all sitting on a fence, and there was a cat, and the cat was sitting on a stoop. And the birds were looking at the cat, and the cat was looking at the birds, but none of them did anything. They just sat there and observed one another, and there was no harm. The cat didn't chase them, the birds didn't fly, but they were looking at each other. They were being cautious, but not fearful. And I finished my count, and I was on a main road, and I looked up and I saw an Erev. Now, for those of you who don't live near Jewish communities, an Erev is this thin line that surrounds their neighborhood as sort of a loophole that lets people do what is known as carrying outside of their homes. This line, it's almost like a fishing line, a little bit thicker. It extends the paradigm of home to the borders of this Erev. So their home goes beyond the walls in which they live. It goes beyond their fence. It goes beyond their block in their neighborhood, and it goes all the way out to this Erev. And I wondered which side of the Erev I was on. I expect that I was on the outside of it, because my neighborhood is mostly Asian. There are Jewish people here, but it's mostly Asian. And there are other people too. It's probably about 70% Asian and 30% everything else. But I got to this Erev and I thought, this is something that I had never noticed in my neighborhood before. I've heard about them. I've seen them on TV. I've read about them. My more orthodox friends have told me about them, but I had never seen one until that moment. And I saw this Erev, and that was something new too. And so I finished my count, and I went home, and I got to my home, and I looked where the caterpillar was, but the caterpillar wasn't there anymore, and I wondered where it might have gone.